Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Thrive with Kate podcast. And today I'm here with Anu Sim. And we're going to talk about microbiome health, Ayurveda, and plant based recipes. So, for those who don't know Anu, she's coming out with a new book called Flourish from Within, where she's talking about gut health and how to help people who want to get off medications and treat lifestyle disease through microbiome supporting recipes. So, welcome, Anu. I'm so glad that we get to
Thank
have a
you, Kate.
conversation.
Pleasure to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's just talk a little bit about your background as a plant-based chef and some of the recipes in the book for microbiome that people might, just maybe not be making at home right now who are into health and yoga and Ayurveda.
Yeah, from a microbial perspective, I see that plant source diversity is really so important for microbial diversity. So there's an incredible amount of body of research supporting that, and especially with different prebiotic fibers and plant sources. So when I call myself a plant-based chef, I really want to say I'm a more a health-based chef. I don't know if my recipes are really that amazing. I just really think that it really serves the microbiome. So I really go at it from that perspective. And there's a lot of confusion about microbiome health and um, how do you feed it. My book was mainly to kind of just clarify some of that, especially in this whole world of probiotics, prebiotics. There's a bunch of, most people think it's fine to take a probiotic pill.
Mm.
So I gently nudge my clients to start eating prebiotic foods, increasing their plant diversities, and to help them feel better in their bodies, because we know now that your microbiome is like almost like a gatekeeper to your lifelong health. There's an incredible amount of research around it. So anyone who comes to see me with not necessarily gut issues, but brain fog or joint pain or metabolic issues, um, making that microbiome health as like this foundation for lifelong health is definitely something that excites me. And there's an incredible connection. And this book was a way for me to explore that connection. And plant sources are one of the things. But that doesn't mean that someone who is not plant-based or who chooses to eat animal protein cannot benefit from that. So I feel like as long as you have different variety of plant sources on your plate, then you're in a good place.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So this whole idea of nutrient diversity and plant diversity, let's talk a little bit more about that. Uh, so what we find, right, is that humans over time are with the commercialization of food and factory foods is that we're eating fewer and fewer species of foods. So it's like I feel like there's two different conversations here. And one is the diversity of the different microbes in our body. And we know that for healthy microbiome to be in eubiosis or healthy microbiome, that we need a diversity of species of bacteria and archaea and fungi and even viruses to have a healthy microbiome. And then when we look at diversity of plant nutrition, right? Like what are the micronutrients in the foods that we need a variety of different plant species in order to feed these
Mhm.
the diversity of microbial species. And so then we could say that there's in dysbiosis when there's chronic inflammation in the body and when there's maybe in biofilms or that could show up as these symptoms, any symptoms of chronic inflammation, like you listed, like brain fog or even allergies, chronic rhinitis, just having low energy, right? Chronic fatigue, all of the autoimmune disorders, all of the serious diseases that or linked to chronic inflammation, that those are happening in a dysbiotic state where there's fewer microbial types in greater
Yeah.
populations.
Yeah.
And and you're saying that that is linked to having a diet that doesn't have enough diversity of plants.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times we, even just starting with what is a healthy microbiome, I really think of a healthy microbiome as a resilient microbiome, something, and a resilient microbiome is a microbiome that has species richness and species evenness. And when you're talking about Mexico, I always use that as an example. When people travel outside, end up with things like traveler's diarrhea and things like that. But they're able to completely rebound from it. Then there's the good chance that their microbiome is resilient. They're able to handle the assaults. But if they're not able to, and they end up having to have chronic diarrhea or chronic symptoms, and have to then resort to antibiotics, and the antibiotics themselves cause other issues and cause species death of certain species, that causes a slew of problems. So in order for that microbiome to be resilient, we need to grow these species. Uh, I don't know about, I'm sure you have something similar to report, but in my practice, I know they say around 300 to 400, a healthy American has about 400 species. And we compare ourselves to someone in the Hadza tribe who's like 1,500 species. We have very little. But I personally haven't even seen that in my practice. The maximum I've seen on a whole genome sequencing is like maybe about 200.
Mhm. Yeah.
And the least I've seen is about 22.
Oh my gosh.
So, and that's like a ticking time bomb, like there's so much happening at a gut brain level, and all the inflammatory markers. And sometimes we don't even know that this is happening within us. And we may not yet have the symptoms. So, but it is brewing. So I feel like if we are able to approach it with, it is not just about food for us, but it's also about feeding our forever guests because they've always been within us, in us, and part of our evolutionary journey. And if we are able to feed them what they have evolved to look at as fuel, then we're doing ourselves a huge favor too, because it is a symbiotic relationship, and helping them really helps us. So I would say that from that perspective, having that fuel as different kinds of fibers, fibers comes from the plant kingdom, changing up how we eat. We tend to mono eat in this country. We have a few veggies or foods or recipes that we like, and we stick to it just for convenience. And I've done that myself over the years. And so my big passion is to, let's change it up. Let's have a system around it so it becomes easier, because we all have crazy lives, we have busy lives, and sometimes having to make these recipes that have like 15 different ingredients is just not possible. It just puts a lot of, and then it doesn't stick. So I'm hoping that with these recipes that are simple and having a system which says, hey, if you're going to be having um, maybe 5 different kinds of plant foods this week, change it up next week. Maybe have the same category, let's say broccoli. If you're having like a regular broccoli from Whole Foods, change it up to a Chinese broccoli or a Korean, and that's enough of a change and a shift in your fiber that you're getting from this plant source is enough for the microbes to see that as a different kind of fuel. So
Yeah.
that's a good start for someone who's saying, where do I start? And this sounds very daunting. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of Michael Pollan's book where he talked about that, like the average American has 30 different species
Yeah.
of food a year. Right. And then when we look at, well, that means that we live in a consumer centric culture in capitalist countries. And so we're seen more as consumers than as citizens. And so in order to like reclaim, I love the finding, the research finding that the microbiome is an organ that every other organ is dependent on. So we start to think of it not as these outside species that live within us, but it's an organ within our system that needs to be healthy, and it thrives on species diversity within its own ecosystem, and then it thrives on diversity of nutrients and plant sources and even phytochemicals, right? The diversity of these phytochemicals. Then what I look at is like, well, us as consumers or us as citizens, what demand are we putting on the marketplace? Because if we're just happy buying the same broccoli every week and not the Asian cabbage, then the Asian cabbage is going to disappear. And we
Yeah.
see this, anyone who's studying the food industry as a vertical can see that there's a massive we're going towards a deficit or a depletion of diversity in what's available, and not just in urban areas where urban neighborhoods that are food deserts, but really across the board. Like Costco is profitable, increasingly profitable, largely based on decreasing the SKUs, the SKUs, which means that they're carrying fewer and fewer products,
Right.
right? And we see this across the board, that it's expensive, that it's more of a citizen driven initiative to put demand on
Yeah.
suppliers to
That's
supply.
a great way to look at that, Kate. I know. I mean, I look at it from like a seasonal perspective, like in Ayurveda, for example, that's a huge part is seasonal. And all those studies don't specifically say seasonal is has these benefits. From a microbial perspective, we do know that there are shifts in the microbiome based on seasons, right? When we look at the Hatha tribe or anyone, like the dry season versus the wet season. I look at it as the seasons, a chance to just explore the season's offerings and and find a way to increase diversity. But I had never, I have to admit, your approach to that from the perspective of consumerism is also, I think it's brilliant. I think that's also happening, just at so many levels that we're also part of this conversation. We need to shift it.
Wait, where I saw that the most was when the medical medium, when he blew up on Instagram, and he was promoting starting the day with celery juice, and it changed global celery production.
Oh yeah, I can.
Right. And so when we start to see like, oh, we actually all of us listening who are interested in our own health or interested in microbiome, get that we are our microbiome, get that our health is completely dependent on our microbiome health. That like, wow, we can actually change demand. So we talked a little bit about fiber in different vegetables. Let's talk about spices and spice diversity, and how spice diversity and these specific polyphenols and phytochemicals feed different microbial organisms.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that there are polyphenol digesting bacteria in our gut. They thrive on it. My main clientele are women, women who are trying to lose weight and keep the weight off. And I see a huge connection between microbial diversity and this restrictive diets and a drop in microbial diversity that really results in that yo-yo weight gain. And there's been many studies, like from Weizmann Institute, for example, that really talked about the gut microbiome actually having an obesity memory. They remember, you can lose the weight, but it comes back. And every other metabolic signal could be fine, your cholesterol, your blood sugar, all of that. But that weight gain, it just comes back because the bugs remember it as that obesity memory, and a large part of it is because on a restrictive diet, we're not eating flavonoid-rich foods. And flavonoids have this incredible, there's a possibility of how you extract energy from food, what kind of, how you're doing that. And also the diversity, like firmicutes, bacteroidetes, all of these bugs and the ratio in which they show up really depends on the diversity in your food sources. So I would say from that perspective, increasing, even when you're on a diet to lose weight, if you're always mindful of, I'm not just feeding me, but I'm feeding these microbes,
Mhm.
and making sure that you have that diversity in food sources. I've seen that really work really well for people who are trying to lose weight and keep it off.
Yeah.
There's something that I've become very at first it was just an experimental thing. I thought, let's see if this happens. Why are you coming back with gaining this weight? What is happening with your metabolic picture?
Mm.
But now, having put all of these things into place, I see such incredible light, from um, feeding them from day one with flavonoid rich foods, polyphenols, herbs and spices, like you said, things like cloves that are so high in antioxidants, maybe the highest on the ORAC scale, making teas with turmeric that can completely change your gut picture if you find something that just stays in the gut without the um, black pepper and all of that becomes systemic. Um, I would say moringa is another favorite of mine. I've seen many studies that show that moringa really helps. And of course, from an Indian perspective, I think moringa has been studied for ages, eons, even in the Ayurvedic world. Yes, I have some really my favorite spices that I start my clients on from day one, just to support this flavonoid polyphenol approach to um, uh, weight management and metabolic health. Because, Kate, you probably see this. I mean, so many people are struggling with obesity and resorting to drugs, I mean, for cholesterol, for, blood pressure, for insulin resistance, you name it. We just have a drug for everything today. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Amen to that. I think for the people who've studied Ayurveda, and there's probably quite a few of them listening, you might reflect on this whole idea between polyphenols and flavonoids and that which is feeding the microbiomes in terms of spices. So the Ayurvedic practitioners learn to use spice before herbs, right? To treat with food as medicine, and particularly the spices, and then the meal spacing or the fasting rhythm. And when we look at that dynamic and how that affects, whether it's weight or really any other issue, it's like, can the individual in front of you, it's like whoever's in front of you, it's like, what spices are they currently using, what season is it, what's the nature of the imbalance, and then what are these, and we have these different words like these digestives, these tapanas, and these takras, like, are there ways that we can use spice directly as that which we're affecting the microbiome, like that which we're affecting particularly the gut microbiome. And and we all have been trained in this, like, oh, that's why we're fasting except for having fennel tea, or maybe fennel clove, or maybe fennel cardamom, or maybe, depending on the season, depending on the body type, we're making these very specific spice mixtures before we even get to these other incredible plants that are totally amazing for the microbiome, but are categorized not
yeah,
as carminatives, but are,
yeah.
maybe
Ginger,
alternatives.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think we forget sometimes that these are all plant sources. So when people are talking on Instagram about 30 plants per week or whatever,
Mhm.
count those in. These spices and herbs do make a difference. If you're growing Brahmi in your garden, count that Brahmi in as a gut brain axis helper, because it definitely, I mean, I start my day with like some Brahmi. I just go around my garden and saying, okay, what does my body wanting?
Mhm.
Because when we think about Ayurveda, and I think for me, the biggest takeaway is really looking inward, right?
Mhm.
When Ayurveda talks about ahara, which is food, um, and food is not just what we put into our mouths, but it's thoughts, perceptions, all of that. And if you really connect that to the microbiome, it's pretty much saying the same thing, and science is saying the same thing, that food is not just the act of putting something into your mouth, but it is how you digest it, how you chew it, what happens to it um, after you eat it, and what do you get out of it. And also the gut brain axis, the thoughts, perceptions, all of that matter, and while writing this book, and you probably have a similar experience, um, I was just blown away with how much research is done on neuroscience and the microbiome, the gut brain axis, and uh, I found it pretty easy to understand movement and microbiome. Like from a let's say you're doing yoga and you find stillness on your mat. I see that correlating with the microbiome because it appreciates a good, calm nervous system, right? That was something that was easy for me to understand. But there were certain other things, like, for example, uh, self care, which I had not really thought about self care, and that, I say, yeah, self care, but women and self care, and what we think of self care is usually getting our hair done or painting our nails. But self care, like, that is like a surface self care. But really, really thinking about our what do we want? What is our um what is our ikigai? What's our perspective? All of that is somehow connected to the microbiome. And for me, that was one of the research things that I came across with that was incredible. And I saw that connection to Ayurveda and old Vedic sciences that I've always thought about. It's not just about, the peripheral eating and living, but what life itself is teaching us. That was just, for me, that was just like an eye opener that it is way more than what we believe it is.
So true. Yeah. I think you'll love my book on inflamed because I go very deep into the primal habits, including for humans
Mhm.
purpose and
Okay, I'm
purpose and
definitely going to read it.
ikigai. And yeah, you'll love that because it's like so much. It's exactly this conversation. I want to circle back to what we do in Club Thrive with fasting and microbiome because we're talking so much about feeding microbiome, but if we're eating too frequently or in the change of seasons we're eating too much, then we're just breeding dysbiosis, no matter what we're eating. And as soon as and what we found with the weight fluctuation is as soon as people have automated a 5-day fast mimicking diet or a three day or 72-hour water fast about every quarter. And as soon as that habit is automated, which means that, like, brushing our teeth is an automated habit. You don't decide at night, am I going to brush my teeth or not? You just do it.
Yeah,
What we have found is that we can get into the depth of meta dhatu and the depth of the fat tissue, which is holding the endocrine disrupting chemicals that are causing that obesity memory in the microbiome.
hmm,
And when that can become digested, right, when Agni can penetrate it deeply and repetitively, because it's not like you do it once and that's it. It's got it. We're finding, because we have in our Club Thrive community, almost everybody in there has automated this habit.
yeah,
When it becomes that automated, the body knows to go into fasting. And it can feel that, like, oh, things are boggy, the system's boggy, which in Ayurveda we might say that there's an accumulation of doshas in the digestive tract or an accumulation of dysbiosis in the gut microbiome. And when we allow the Agni or the digestive fire to just work on what's already there without any new inputs and get through the digestive biofilms that then it goes for the fat tissue. Then the agni or the digestive fat, it goes to the storage unit. It starts to break down these pro-inflammatory fat cells and turns them into anti-inflammatory fat cells. And that really gets to the core of that weight fluctuation and changes the cravings. And I find this is so misunderstood. I was talking with a longevity specialist last week, and he was saying, these very famous studies from, it's now getting to close to 100 years ago on mice around calorie restriction. And these studies were that if you restrict the calories of, I think it was mice or rats, I think it was mice, by 30%, then they have an increase in longevity and energy and a diminishment of all chronic disease. And so when we understand that we're actually eating 30% more than we need to, and that 30% that we're eating is causing the dysbiosis, is limiting, it's like in the easiest way of like, just do nothing. If you're too busy to help your microbiome, do nothing, like including eat less. And then that naturally will promote a pro-eubiotic state because the body will literally digest the dysbiotic microbes and feed the eubiotic microbes that are creating all the serotonin for your, for your feel good experience. And just in that, we get the clarity to purpose, that ikigai of like, what am I here to do in this lifetime? That comes from a fasting rhythm. And then we can feel what we're hungry for because our sense of smell, right? It becomes so much more acute.
Clarity.
Sight becomes acute, our hearing becomes acute, and our taste changes. And that's how we know we're in this pro-eubiotic microbiome diversity building state.
Yeah, I think you're right. And definitely intermittent fasting or time restricted eating and the microbiome. There's some very interesting studies done on it and all very positive, the outcome. And I personally use it for clients who really can adopt to that. And to make that into a habit or make it procedural, like brushing your teeth, it takes time. It takes commitment to it. So if we use it as a tool in our journey, whatever that journey is, whether to lose weight or lifelong health or just like a biohack, but using fasting as a tool, I think just makes incredible sense, just to give our digestive system, because digestion is one of the most inflammatory things that we do to our body, and inflammation does not mean that it's always bad. It can be good too. But when we are eating more than we should, like you said, 30% more, of course, we are creating havoc in the system. And added to that, if our window of eating is very close to bedtime, that's causing problems. We're not respecting our circadian rhythm. And Ayurveda it has always believed in a circadian rhythm, rising with the sun, eating with the sun, the Agni, all of that. And now we're finding that they actually were right, the circadian rhythm matters. And the microbiome also has its own circadian rhythm, very similar to ours. And when we respect our circadian rhythm, they benefit from that. So even one day, one night of poor sleep can decrease microbial diversity. Even one night of sleeping erratically can make us the next day search for at least 500 calories of the ultra processed crap that we put into our bodies. Sorry, but that's shocking, and that's happening all the time because we are creatures of habit, and we, if we don't find a way to say, this is not something I will allow my body to go through, and just really have a system in place and make sure that that system serves us. And eventually, all of these little tools is as simple as brushing our teeth, becomes very procedural. And one of the big things, Kate, that I notice is ultra processed foods. We could just say no to those.
Mhm.
Flour and sugar, big, big things that really affect us. And they're very hard to say because of that dopamine down regulation. It's very difficult to say no to these. Most people are hooked on it. And that's the reason we have so many drugs today to stop that food chatter. Because
Yeah.
you're not going to have chatter around broccoli. It's right.
Yeah.
It's the kind of foods that create this, um, dysbiosis in our systems, both at a mind body level that needs to be addressed. And that goes back to consumerism, that goes back to what you were saying before, that it starts with us, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It starts with us and what we stock our fridge and cupboard with and what
Yeah.
we say yes to when we're eating out of the house. And yeah, yeah, so much in there. I want to also emphasize that what we have found, I'm going to go back to fasting, and what we have found is that doing hard things, because the results are amazing from like like doing the hardest thing, 72-hour water fast for some people, 5-day fast mimicking diet is so hard that when we try to do it alone, we'll fail, usually. Women more than men. And yet when we do it together, it's easier, and there's community. And so that's one of the biggest things. That's why in Wellness Pro Academy we're such massive advocates of the club model. It's because often, we're diagnosed with something, or we self-diagnose ourselves, and maybe it is with weight creep where we're gaining a couple of pounds a year, and eventually we have had enough of ourselves and say, I've got to make a change. And then we start to want to change and start to look for places to invest, to get, whether it's coaching or advice or an experience. And what we know is that these behavioral changes, that in behavior change, that needs to have a tribal component,
Oh, 100%.
right? And we need.
Definitely, definitely. And I have learned this over the years that community is such a big part of it. And food is social, food is cultural, food is a celebration. Food is something we use for grief. Food is used in so many different ways.
And so
And
is fasting. I just want to insert that.
and fasting,
So
of
is fast,
course.
right? Like
Yeah.
fasting is ceremonial,
Yeah.
fasting is communal, fasting is right. It's like it's
Yeah.
ritual. It's so, and we're so missing
So,
that
and
rhythm.
I think people who work in communities, in groups, see the benefits, really reap the benefits of working in a group. Um,
And it's
so
easier.
it's easier and it's supporting each other. The one thing that I've noticed, I've always thought, oh, America's a melting pot. We all should, communities, anything. But the interesting thing that I'm finding today is that people who, like I have cohorts, like I have the African American cohort, I have an Indian cohort, I have a Jewish cohort, and respecting their culture, respecting their food habits, respecting their holidays, and intertwining fasting and feeding based on their own culture has been fabulous because they don't have to explain themselves to anybody.
Yeah.
you know, uh, a Black woman has a certain idea of what her body type is, what she feels comfortable, which is very different from a Caucasian or an Asian person. So being in a cohort where everybody else feels the same way is so freeing. You
Yeah.
don't have to explain, well, I like my butt, I like my boobs, to someone whose culture could be completely different on that.
Mm.
So I find that really so amazing because my job becomes easier.
Yeah.
Because they're doing most of the coaching themselves. They are helping each other. They understand each other at
Yeah.
such an incredible level that which would be more forced, when you're saying this is your community. Like for you, you probably have a lot of people who are in our community because they believe in yoga, they believe in Ayurveda, they have similar interests and belief systems, and perhaps their um, final thing towards life and how they approach life and their journey through life is very similar. So that makes a huge difference, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed that, 'cause I've been been leading the yogi detox for over 20 years. And in the early days, we were using more of like khichdi and Indian spices. And I think within a year, like very early on, realized it's like it's much more powerful if people use their ancestral spices. So if they happen to be Indian, Ayurveda is great. Like the Ayurvedic spices are great. But, for someone of Jewish culture, the caraway seed is so much
Yeah.
more potent than the cumin seed, and they have fairly similar properties. But one is
Yeah.
to awaken the. I love how Terence McKenna talks about enthalpy in the genome, and like how do you protect your human DNA so that it
Yeah.
remembers the evolutions of the past. Well, that's completely built into our spice food memory,
Yes.
right? And then our fasting rhythm is going to be dependent on that religious tradition's
Yeah.
fasting rhythm. And like whether it's this day of the year, or that day of the year, or this group of days versus that group of days has so much to do with our cultural memories.
Yeah.
I love that you're bringing
Definitely.
that into.
Yeah, and I think this ancestral, there's an ancestral healing, and when we respect that, and there are many cultures that are so interested in learning more. And I just find that, for example, I work with a lot of African Americans, African heritage foods, um, bringing in your grandmother's recipes,
Yeah.
and tweaking them for today's modern world. Like, for example, in Indian food, khichdi is respected. It's like the god of all recipes.
Mhm.
But with the amount of insulin resistance Indians are going through right now,
Yeah.
history is not a good fit,
Right.
for most people.
Yeah.
You have to understand why. Our great grandparents, I mean, I remember my great grandfather would walk like 20 miles a day, not because he was rucking or something like that. He
Yeah.
just had to. He had to get to work, and he lived in a village. He had to walk to the city, and the rice was a no-brainer. He had so much activity, under his belt that he digested the rice. He was able to assimilate it, absorb it, and the microbiome use it. That is not happening in today's world.
Yeah.
This is what we're doing. We're sitting and talking most of the day.
Yeah.
And if we have a meal that is high in, refined carbs or simple carbs, we are going to have an, excursion from it. So understanding that, that it's not the food, it's where we find ourselves, in this modernity, and the world that we find ourselves is also important. The context matters.
Yeah. Yeah. And just taking the rice out and having spicy mung bean soup, right? It's like the antidote for
Yeah.
the diabetic Indian who's eating their
Yeah.
ancestral
Yeah.
food to recover.
Yeah.
It's so easy. I love that perspective of just like what is the adjustment? What is the tweak
Yeah.
where it's not so different? One of the things that I found, and I'll include in the show notes a few ebooks for those who want my microbiome shopping list and uh, survival guide. Is often it's just a matter of stocking the fridge. For those who aren't making their own prebiotic, probiotic foods like sauerkraut or kimchi or any kind of fermented vegetable like beets or
Dosa.
dosa, right, that aren't fermenting their mung beans. Uh, so in terms of the stuff that's now available, I also noticing that, at stores like Whole Foods and people's local Whole Food stores, that there are more and more of these fermented foods that are for sale that have living bacteria in them, like live culture sauerkrauts, live culture yogurts, live culture kefirs, live culture uh a lot of the different. I've even seen
The gut shot.
the gut shot, the miso paste that are like,
Yeah.
different varieties of like living bacteria.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because when you really think about probiotics and the definition of a probiotic, it's something that confers some kind of benefit to the host, right?
Yeah.
So when you go to the grocery store and you find something that says probiotic cultures, we don't know what strains are in the in that particular product. So I find that a little kind of misleading.
Mhm.
I prefer to find something that very clearly says this particular product has Lactobacillus reuteri
Mhm.
or BB lactus 12, giving me an idea that, okay, this may be a better fit for what I need. Like if I am constipated, then I would probably pick something with BB lactus 12 because it's a strain that has been studied for constipation. So that kind of a lot of times it's the shiny object syndrome, right? We go to the
Mhm.
grocery store, something looks really pretty, it says all the right things on the label. We say, oh, maybe this is good for us. But I think when it comes to microbiome, I mean, why is it that probiotics are still not something that doctors are saying, are prescribing? It's not at that point yet. And that is because we aren't looking at the strain level. So we have to see the kind of strains that these.
I honestly think that's because pharmaceutical companies are creating highly targeted microbial drugs, and so it'll stay at that. It's just back to consuming signature microbiome medicines is the wave of the next wave of one of the next waves of pharmaceuticals. So it's again, how do we
Yeah.
create consumers? We create an unhealthy population that's dependent on a product
But if,
rather than like
for
go buy some
example,
cabbage and some salt.
right. Yeah. That's true. And for example, I mean, my thing with acromansia, for example, it's anaerobic, very difficult to grow in a lab. But eventually, I think we have a couple of companies that are doing that, but they're expensive.
Expensive.
$100 a pop,
Yeah.
why not grow your own acromansia? I mean, the thing to remember is when you take a probiotic, they're transitory in nature at best, So if you stop taking it, you lose the benefit. But if you're using prebiotics to grow your probiotic culture, species, for example, Akkermansia really thrives on pomegranate, green tea, dark chocolate, all of those polyphenolic rich compounds. Uh, I have seen that change compared to just saying, I'm just going to take an Akkermansia supplement.
Yeah.
It's a huge, yeah, shift. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the probiotic supplement industry is considered, I would say, within the entire supplement industry to be one of the most profit driven and corrupt in terms of not actually delivering on the the misleading health benefits, right? Of saying that this is good for that. Because what we know about exactly what you're saying about probiotics is that like if you're taking it in a supplement form, the chance of it actually being adopted into your system is very, very, very low. Whereas if we use foods, let's start talking then about like how do we in your recipe book, right? And flourish from within. Uh, Tell us about a few recipes that your clients have had just an easy time adopting, maybe making at home that are pre and probiotic.
So, Kate, the book was really written for the layperson. I still remember the day when I decided I'm going to write this book was I was going to a conference, and the Uber driver said, "What kind of conference? What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, it's something about the microbiome." And he said, "What's that?"
Yeah.
That is the person I wrote the book for. 2 out of 3 Americans do not know. We live in a world where we feel like everybody knows what the microbiome is, but that's not true. 2 out of 3 Americans do not know the word microbiome. And I'm on a mission to change that. So this book is not for that person who's like, oh, I already know a lot about the microbiome and I'm looking for, I'm doing a practitioner's course that goes along with the book for someone who is already in tune with your microbiome who wants to learn more, as far as recipes and things like that. But this one's a starting point of increasing diversity. The first part of the book is largely about the microbiome, and in a layperson's word, I try to simplify the science as best as I could. Section 2 is about a diet that I propose, which I call the Flourish diet, and it's about basic fundamental layers of what the microbiome needs, enhancers like herbs, spices, good fats, things like that, and functional foods like your beta glucans, polyphenols, and things like that. So based off all of that, I just give simple recipes. My whole mantra is convenience leads to consistency. And so my recipes are very simple, easy to make. And once you're in my world, you'll get lots of recipes that are more strain driven. Like, for example, if you want to make a lactobacillus reuteri yogurt, and if you're plant based, and how would you make that with coconut? That sort of, more going deeper into that. How would something like dandelion greens, along with certain herbs and spices, increase that species richness from foods? So that's more at this advanced level. In the book, it's like basic recipes to get you past this idea of mono eating,
Mm.
get you eating more for diverse plant sources was the goal of the book.
Yeah. Do you want to share some recipes?
Sure. The one that I like a lot is, again, when I say convenience leads to consistency, and you and I have talked about, how does one make something procedural?
Mm.
So I have a recipe in there which maybe as an Ayurvedic practitioner, you're not, you're like, oh, what? It's a salad, but you could make it into a warm salad, So it's basically a formatted approach to a recipe. So I have a format where you take in this many greens, whatever greens that you want, add in some liver supporting greens like mustard, arugula, things like that. So you have the opportunity of changing these things on a weekly basis. Add some prebiotic foods, fermented foods like kimchi, sauerkraut, make your own, and some good fats, whatever that is for you, protein of your choice, be it animal or plant. I don't go into that because we have enough dogma, I don't want to
Mm.
add to that. And
Yeah.
then, and we mix it all up into a big, beautiful meal. And the most important thing is not just what you eat, how you eat it, because mindfully chewing that digestion begins in your mouth. You're producing a lot of secretory IgA, a lot of carbohydrate digesting amylase. So everything starts with how you chew the food, and finally, the satiety aspect of it, and how your leptin, your ghrelin, all of them respond to having a meal that is volumetrically suitable for someone who likes the idea of big food, but the food is not coming from ultra processed.
It sounds like it's like the Buddha bowl and the sixth taste, right? How we have, or the thali in Indian culture, where we have a meal that
Exactly.
has all the different tastes, and we don't get.
There is an Indian thali in the recipe. You're right. I do have a thali recipe because that's a lovely way of introducing. Because your microbiome doesn't want like huge amounts of food. They're just looking for diversity,
Yeah.
right? So different kinds of veggies, and some people do so much better on cooked foods, and some do better on raw foods. It
Mhm.
all depends on where your gut health is. I mean, in Ayurveda, a lot of it is something that's steamed or cooked with a little bit of oil and things like that. But many of my clients do perfectly well, especially the pitta kind of people, or even kapha. They do really well on raw foods as well. So it's
Yeah.
hard to say. Yeah.
Well, back in 2015, I ran the Ayurveda Summit and interviewed a lot of gurus and um, experts from around the Ayurvedic world. And there are many that are raw food Ayurveda. So it's not, to me, it's a misnomer a bit, just from, you know, basically when we went from living more in more primal, smaller groups to larger groups, we
You
had
have to think about this came at the
sanitation.
time when
Yeah.
uh, we didn't want to take any chances with raw foods.
Yeah, exactly.
We're
Sanitation
in a
was an
different
issue.
place right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Entirely. And that whole idea of it takes six tastes. And then we're back to that diversity of taste in order to feel satiation, in order to feed the microbiome. There's so much of this wisdom that we might not, those studying Ayurveda right now might not really like make these connections of like, oh, all of that you learned in gut health and digestion and Agni and Ahara Rasa, like all of that is microbiome health
Yeah.
and eating rhythm and circadian rhythm or dinacharya, ritucharya, that these rhythms that is all microbiome health. We're just using
Yeah.
we have a new level of understanding, another word, I would say another map to the same
Yeah.
territory. But all of
I
that,
love how beautifully they're connected. Like I think in yoga, you say samatva, right? That inner balance, that inner feeling of feeling that true nature of who you are and doesn't depend on outer circumstances. That just can be beautifully connected to the gut and the microbial picture as well.
yeah. One of the most surprising things I found in writing on Inflamed, which is mostly a microbiome book, is how cow dung is used not just in India, but across many First People species globally, and how like the microbiome of dirt is the highest, and then cow dung is like the second highest in terms of microbial diversity. And cow dung was used in every ritual, right? And it was
Yeah.
diluted into water.
Antibacterial.
It was used as an antibacterial, and it's
Yeah.
so counterintuitive to think we were
Yeah.
cleaning with dung, we were cleaning with urine, we were cleaning with that which has a it's so interesting, like a probiotic absorbent experience. That's the how cow urine was used, and then the cow dung has all this microbial diversity, and that we were like literally the walls were plastered with cow dung, like literally in rituals, like cow dung waters like sprayed
Yeah.
around
Have
the
you
birth
have you been
barrier.
to a house with the cow dung on
Yeah,
the walls? It's like, isn't that funny? Like when you walk in, you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't breathe. I can't take this in.
yeah,
And it's amazing how your whole, all of your senses just assimilates it and then
really,
it's
yeah,
fine. It's
yeah.
in just very short amount of time, you're okay with it.
Well, in my experience, Anu, like that is how the sinus microbiome comes alive, is in where what I notice with my clients is, especially the more impacted someone's sinus microbiome is, they're now, they're oral breathing, they may have sleep apnea, they may have, which all of which means that they're in dysbiosis. And that the sense of what smells, like what smells good or what smells, I don't even have the right word for it. It's like it is this level of like sama agni, where there's a sense of right environment, right? That the healthier the sinus, the healthier and more diverse the sinus microbiome, the more nitric oxide is being produced, the more those types of smells, those earth smells, those dung smells, those urine smells, they're actually increasing the intelligence of the brain, right? Because the sinus
Yeah.
microbiome is sitting like right next to, like the olfactory bulbs are going right into the cerebrospinal fluid. And the more someone has been sensied, if you will, where they've been in this xenotoxic fragrance world, which is everywhere in our cleaning products, it's in our big box stores, we can't get away from it. And the more that they're attenuated to that, the more damaged their sinus microbiome is, the more aversion, right? That word Sanskrit, devesha, the more aversion they have to that which will actually rejuvenate their sinus microbiome and heal them.
And we don't even think about that, right? I mean, because we're so caught up in eating a certain way, smelling certain things.
Yeah.
Like I remember when I came to the States a long time ago, I, the first week was just torture for me because I thought everything smelled so sweet. I was throwing up every single day.
My God.
I couldn't handle it because I come from a land of spices, and all I could smell was cinnamon and something sweet, like the cinnamon. Is it Cinnabons or?
Cinnabon. Yeah.
So I literally,
Oh, it smells like sugar. Yeah, yeah. No, I know exactly that smell.
so I think every country has its own spice forward, kind of. But having that balance is what Ayurveda talks about, and the microbiome really respects. Um, just that polyphenolic richness that comes from herbs and spices,
Yeah.
like curry leaves, for example, we always think of curry leaves as something that you chew on and you throw it away, but it has so many incredible compounds. I would say, no, eat it,
Yeah.
chew it, and yeah,
Swallow.
swallow it.
Yeah. I do the same thing. And for those who don't have access to, like, I live in places where there's a lot of evergreens. And so I use the pines. I use the sulfur
Yeah.
compounds in the pines the same way, and just chew it and then swallow it and get that fiber moving through.
Yeah. And I don't know if you have clients and people, even in the Ayurvedic world, who talk about oxalates and lectins. And I've been, in this whole podcast journey, I've come across a lot of people say, but what do you do about phytic acid? What do you do about lectins? What do you do about oxalates? And that is the beauty of the microbiome. If you have the right species doing the behind the scenes work for you, none of this is a problem. You have something called oxalate formagens, we know, that can really kind of digest that oxalates from your spinach and your Swiss chard, making it easier for you to digest the higher oxalate load. It's funny how we've just become so divided and I wonder what you think about that. Do you see that as well? Just this division as far as food and
I just see in general, like, a lack of understanding of the connection between what's outside and what's inside. You
yeah.
know what I mean? So more seeing, like, it sounds like where your intelligence and mine is really different is like yours is more specific. Whereas I'm like really big picture, like just go get your hands in the dirt. It's got everything, you know, like just find the plants outside and start eating them. They're here. Like the 10 plants outside your door are the ones that are, whether it's a dandelion or a pine needle or, you know,
Yeah.
right now they're salt.
Which is the big picture that we all want, right? I mean, make food rules very simple. You
Yeah.
know, go outside, enjoy vitamin D, enjoy the sun, play with your dog who goes places that you don't go, work in your garden, grow as much as you can. You could be in a little tiny apartment and you can grow enough herbs and spices. I know. I mean, I've done that many, many times.
Wow.
So I do understand what you're saying about the big picture, and the details. I mean, the forest rather than the trees, right? But when you're working with clients, sometimes the
Yeah.
details matter,
Oh yeah, no, and I love that. I love that you can go into this species diversity. We'll have to do another show just specifically on the antitotal species.
Yeah.
I would love that. Well, thank you so much, Anu. It's absolutely been
Yes.
a pleasure. For those who are looking for Anu's website, it's 9 Arms of Wellness, and it's the number 9, armsofwellness.com. And you can book a free call there. And yeah, Anu, it's just been an absolute pleasure to get to know you.
And it was a pleasure, Kate.